Today's agenda, similar as last sessions. Quickly, again, reiterating what climate reporting is about, making sure we fully understand the pillars that are involved. We're going to deep dive into strategy now with actually be more examples and more questions coming from Maka. And this is a really important pillar that brings everything together. And I'll actually show you how in public reports this already looks like, so you can start getting some visualization of the end goal. Now, this is the third session. There's two more to go. The next one is in risk, and we'll cover how to build a risk enterprise framework or enterprise risk framework. I really, really recommend you join the session. The asset delivered from that is really, really valuable, and you can implement that in your own company or as a consultancy, having that as part of your toolkit. So, I'd love to chat about that. And then session 5 is metrics and targets, heavily related to your strategy, but also this is more about the emissions measurements angle of climate reporting. If you haven't signed up, please do so. Using Zoom, everyone knows how to do it by now. I'm going to skip that. And now, as promised in my email before this session, I'm going to spend 2 minutes on what happened this month in Australia related to climate reporting. Two big things happened. First, the government released its emissions reduction target. That target is this number, and the discussions, in our own social bubble, in social media, it's been around if this number is ambitious enough. Without discussing if it's ambitious enough, it's going to be sufficient to keep us in the path for preventing global warming and so forth. It is important to notify the money that the government has committed to decarbonize. And what I recommend is understanding, going to those documents, and I might hold a different session on that, just on these targets, to visualize how it can impact your industry. Okay, your industry might fall within certain sectors that have been selected as priority to decarbonization. So as a company, you might find new opportunities, new product lines, access to grants, reduce costs in certain technologies. And as a consultant, of course, you can double down on those industries to find opportunities to assist these organizations to decarbonize, right? So this is all about how do we keep us, below this, scenario that is rolling out in terms of climate change, and how is government funding that, and what is the ambition level. That's the target. It's a very nice document. I recommend you actually open up the full target document and go and find your sector, because the summary is a bit too technical and might skip some of the things that are important to you as a business. And I'll link all of this after the session in the email, so keep an eye out for that. On the climate risk assessment, this is about understanding how climate and a changing climate is going to impact Australia. So this is things like predicting the cost, the disasters, and how we can adapt to things like sea level rise, increased storms, bushfires, and so forth. This is of particular importance not only in your personal life to understand where you live, your exposure, insurance in your property, but as a business to understand where your physical assets might be located, and how in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years you're going to be exposed to different physical things. So physical things is things you can touch, like changing temperature, water, fires, etc. And then from a business perspective as well, not only on the physical assets, is what happens to your logistics, right? What happens if trucks have to divert because roads are closed or they're flooded? And we have already practical examples in Australia, northern New South Wales, with the floods, the disruption that impacts in supply chains. This is that document. So really interesting maps, really interesting projections. You can have it, save on your computer and kind of just go through it at your own time whenever you have a question, or you think, especially as we cover risk on the next webinar, how can you adapt some of that new information into that. It is a bit overwhelming in terms of there's a lot of things that are going to happen in the future. Our jobs as business leaders is to adapt our businesses to be resilient to those things. Any questions on those two documents, please email me. Would love to know if you're interested in a session on the targets and the climate risk assessment. If so, please let me know via email. and we'll try to organize that as well. All right. So as you know, early this year, Maka and everyone in NetNada did a beautiful research report that interviewed sustainability leaders within these companies. They're preparing the reports, and we've had a lot of insights. But related to strategy, is that strategy, it is the piece of disclosure that people are struggling the most with. Why? Well, you need all the other information to prepare your strategy. And because things haven't been completed yet or are in the process of, and they didn't have examples of what that strategy looks like, it was hard to prepare. And we are seeing more and more that strategy is what you draft last, but it's important to understand it might take time, might take approvals, and as you will see in a bit, strategy might involve quantitative analysis as well, and understanding the financial impacts of certain things in your business, and that requires a lot of stakeholder involvement. We keep on interviewing sustainability managers and teams behind the disclosures to bring those knowledges or playbooks back to you whenever possible. So please, stay in the comments with us.
And just jumping in there, Afonso, to link it to what we've seen in the previous presentation webinar, the strategy, it's also very linked to the governance and this idea of upskilling the executives to understand how, again, those risks and opportunities that Afonso was talking about before can impact actually your business in the coming 2, 3, 5 years. Once you understand that, then it's easier to embed that into your strategy.
Yeah, and remember that we are trying to provide evidence to third parties, to the users of this report, that your business has operationalized a lot of these insights. And the strategy, one needs to be disclosed. A bit of a recap to understand the users of your report. Those users might be banks, private equity, or your customers. So be aware of who you're writing this for and how they need to feel trust that you're doing the right things. The objective is to answer what climate-related factors, so maybe by looking at that risk document and by looking at the targets, can impact the future of your company. Who is responsible to integrating those things into decision making, right? So the link of governance, risk registers, and so forth, and how the company plans to adapt their business. So you might realize that you analyze all of this data and you say climate has no impact on my business, and then the third party will judge if that is really what they believe and if they should keep on investing in what you do. Your goal is to keep your company existing or growing while these risks are occurring, and we work towards mitigating them. This pillar ensures that your company is resilient, transparent, and aligned with now is already assumed under these documents it's going to be a low carbon future. So if we don't see evidence that you are transferring into a low carbon future, you might be left behind in terms of long-term success. Again, this is not just about risks, it's about risks and opportunities. And when it comes to opportunities, you really need to understand your business, what you do, how your market reacts to be able to make informed decisions. Any questions on that, please do let me know. So the core thing of strategy is creating a climate transition plan, a plan that outlines how this would happen. And we're going to spend the rest of the session going through the different components of a climate transition plan and also show you some examples.
And I'm going to take the time to launch the next poll that we have in 3, 2, 1.
Thank you, Maka.
So this is to better understand if you went through strategy sections or not, if you've seen some examples, and the next polls will make sense after this.
Awesome. Well, good to see that some people are, opening the document, which is, not light reading, but it is not many pages. And I recommend if you are in this space to spend some time skimming through that. And after these sessions, maybe actually find the paragraphs, Control F, and see the language that is actually been used and the ambiguity behind that. Thank you, Max. So we have, kind of a 30, 35, 65 split between yeses and nos. So really, really good to see that happening. And thanks everyone for participating. 90% of you participated in the poll, so appreciate it. All right. So why is it needed? Um, when we did our industry report, only 20% of companies had assessed the financial impacts of these risks and opportunities. And just 25 had a formal climate transition plan. So some companies might already had a plan created, and their job now is to adapt that plan into something that is aligned with the regulation. A lot of them didn't have a plan at all. Within that plan, you don't have to do it straight away, but the goal is that you go from just saying climate will have an impact on my business to if I don't do XYZ, it will cost this much to my business. If I want to adapt, change locations, invest in new products, it's going to cost me X to my business. That's where we want to end up visualizing in these reports and integrating that into your company. If you have the report with you, the appendix A kind of describes a bit more on how it like lays out that strategy, and what you'll need to demonstrate is the proactive climate action, meet your legal and regulatory requirements, which is complying with WASB, and align your business with this, sustainable and future ready. Future ready means looking at the risk assessment, looking at the targets, and saying my business can coexist in the next decade within those parameters. These are the components of that strategy. It's 5 of them, and this will map to also the legislation document. There will be a section or a paragraph for each thing that you need to include within the components. So it's kind of laid out for you. Of course, if you're using the NetNada platform, we've mapped those things already in the system. So you can actually go one by one and try and start to complete those requirements with the policies that we have inside the system. Climate-related risk and opportunities, which we will cover in next session. We have this business model and value chain. So explaining how do you make money, how do you exist, and how does your value chain that supports you will get impacted. Strategy, like Maka said, that link a bit to governance, like when are these decisions being made, when are you reviewing these impacts, and at which point are you triggering maybe a meeting or a decision-making process that involves climate risk and opportunities. A good example is you might set a threshold only when I'm going to deploy more than $500,000 in an asset do I actually review the risks and opportunities in my enterprise risk framework, and then I make a decision. Anything below that, you kind of ignore, right? So that could be an example on how it impacts your strategic decision making, and you define strategic as capital investment above $500,000. This is similar how when you're making financial decisions, your financial controllers might have a certain threshold. The same thing can apply to climate. Financial position is understand if you will have, and we'll cover in the next session how you get to those decisions. But if you have to deploy, $1 million to change warehouses, right, and relocate all your inventory, you train your new staff. When I say me, like the audience, the users of the report want to be able to visualize that before it happens and the impact on the business. And if you are putting all these things together, like I said, are you going to be resilient? Do I have trust that your business can face the future that Australia or whatever else you operate is walking into? So really about a bit of future projections and how you would get there. Now, this is a short example of a public report by the University of Sydney. I just took these screenshots to highlight the fact that if you are writing a report as a sustainability manager, with our help, without our help, you actually label all the pages and the headings that are mapping to your legislation. Of course, not every subheading is highlighted here, not every requirement, but the different components of your strategy actually show up as pages or headers in your report. And by having that, and then you cross-checking, it allows you to feel that you are walking towards a progress and that everything is covered. A big emphasis on that climate-related risk and opportunities, because it's like a core of the report, but a lot of just future thinking strategy and how you're going to invest money, how you might move offices to Green Star offices, how you might invest in education. All these things that you potentially will make into the future would show up in that strategy section. Now, things to have in place, and just understand our goal in NetNada is that in the future we can have more and more examples of what transition plans look like by industry, by company size. So when you go about building yours, you already have ideas of what they should look like. Of course, it takes time, but these key things will kind of guide you already in that direction. Clear objectives and targets. So you need to establish those. You need to detail the actions and the milestones. So the milestones is, if you're going to work towards objective, when are you going to do those checks to know that you are doing the progress? It might be on a time basis, so every 6 months or every year, or might be on a milestone basis in terms of when we hit X amount of revenue or when we expand to certain markets. Okay. When it comes to stakeholder engagement, it's just showing evidence of who is going to be collaborating in this. If you were in the past sessions, we gave the idea of setting up a sustainability committee or a climate committee that might have someone from finance, sustainability and risk, or strategy or go to market, and meeting every X amount of time, and then once every 6 months reporting back to executive level on your findings and your progress. So that's that engagement. The assessment of risk opportunities, which we'll cover next session. The resources to do that. So if you decide that you might have an opportunity of creating a new product that satisfy a changing market, let's say if you are in the cleaning sector, you might do a low carbon chemical by collaborating with certain manufacturers. How much is that going to cost? Can you give me an estimate? That's what we want to see, that you're actually allocating money to that. And monitoring and reporting. It's all good that you're doing this. How often are you actually tracking this, and what systems do you have in place to track that progress? If you are an established company, you might have certain times where you are rechecking your policies or talking with procurement to revisit those policies in procurement guidelines, or when you are assessing your suppliers for modern slavery, you might incorporate those actions now with a climate lens as well. Mark, did I miss anything in here? Any questions?
No, actually, I have a question for you. Just thinking on when a company goes and read into the strategy part of the framework, which would you say it's the biggest misconception while reading that? It's 1-2 pages. What's the main thing companies tend to miss at first sight?
I think the first thing they miss, so like they leave to last minute to see if there's enough time or budget, is the financial quantification of these impacts. It's right. It's when you've been doing it maybe for 6 months and you're doing all of these climate reporting, it can feel easy to just storytell what your aspirations are into the future. But companies don't spend enough time to actually circle that back with their peers to align, and then maybe do a small modeling or small calculations of what could be an opportunity or a risk. So it doesn't take much effort, but if you have X amount of customer base and you want to expand a new product, or you might lose certain customers because they don't want to come to your do business with you because you don't align with sustainable products, just quantifying what could be the percentage. And it might not be super accurate to begin with, but just showcasing that you are doing the effort of assessing that. And that shows really a high level of maturity by having a financial quantification of those numbers.
Great.
Awesome. So a climate transition plan should be clear and actionable, so not wishy-washy. It should be aligned with your overall business strategy. Don't tell me that you're gonna change physical asset locations because of climate if in your other side of the business strategy you actually didn't allocate any capital or time to actually relocate and assess wherever you can move your warehouses, right? So be credible in that. Be future focused. What happened in the past, unless it's related to showcasing evidence of climate awareness within your business, it's a bit irrelevant. So this is about doing your climate scenarios moving forward, and of course be quantifiable. Include your own reduction targets. The government has set theirs. Maybe you can draw some inspiration on how um, they craft that message and why they decided on the target. You might look at other companies in your industry to see what target they're setting, and then get inspired by that and associated timelines. It should not be a generic template. So even if you start with a template, you need to adapt this to your own industry and business. Don't be vague or non-committal. Make the pledge, make a line on the number, say it out loud, write it. And if in the future, in next years, you now have new information that forces you to change that goal, you can openly say that. And also be short term. Don't only say that in 15 years we're going to assess that. We want to show things happening today, and it might be money to investigate, money to find out, money to research. Okay, more information could be the first step.
We got a really good question from Anne here. She's saying the financial analysis in the legislation appears to be more based on the cost of your mitigation strategies and residual impacts compared to the possible cost of inaction. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a like I say, there's a bit of ambiguity. You can do both or just do one or none. But the main thing where companies would start, or like the main priority by the language of the legislation, is how much money would it cost to mitigate, well, if you want to decarbonize, what's going to be that cost, right? But they also want to know the cost of exposure. What I mean by that is, one thing is, if you're going to achieve net zero by X, you might have to invest in solar panels, so you need to allocate that budget, or you might have to invest in premium products that have a low carbon footprint. But you also want to showcase if you have to go into a new assets physical location that is more, it's not in a floodplain, or actually needs an upgrade in maintenance to become more energy efficient. We want to understand what that money is going to be.
Which I guess that would also be linked to your opportunities in the future as a business.
Yeah. I hope that answers your question. The cost of inaction might be, and people might not model this, but if I don't move, again, the example of a warehouse, your risk exposure of a flood now goes from like 5% every year to like 25% every year over the next 20 months. And maybe your insurance will actually ask you, can you model what's going to be that impact, because your premiums might increase. So now your cost of inaction is actually the cost of your insurance going up, as an example. All right. So looking at climate risk and opportunities first. This is to help organizations, identify and disclose, and we want to showcase evidence that you understand what these physical and transition risks posed by climate change are. Key things to consider: it's the physical versus transition, and we'll cover this on the next session. The industry context: we don't care, or the audience doesn't care about what's happening in a different part of the country where you don't operate in, or a different industry that is not yours. It needs to be aligned with what you do, because policies, grants, funding, it's aligned with your industry, and exposure is aligned where you physical operate and do business. And you need to account for these global and local trends. I mean, global is the world is changing in this a certain way, but what's happening specifically where you operate in the context of Australia, but in the context of your region or existing markets. Thanks to the new documents released by the Australian government, you now have more local context to really help you answer these questions, and that makes life easier for everyone. Again, the keyword thing is that it could reasonably, which is like could in a material way affect your business. You don't have to map every risk happening in Australia to every business, just yours. Okay? It's about your business in a material way. Then is how, the projections that have been released have a short-term, medium-term, and long-term horizon or time scale. We need to understand the impacts that's going to happen today, which might be none, right? Where you are, you might have no exposure so far for the next 5 years, but maybe in 25 years or in 15 years, you will have that impact. and we want to understand how we're going to react in the short term, medium term, and long term. You need to do your long-term projections, and those are available, and we can help you do that 10 plus years, and then also select the different scenarios. So there are scenarios, as you'll see in the government document as well, which is where we don't do anything as a society and temperatures keep on climbing very fast, which means more exposure, or we implement these reduction strategies, temperatures coming back down in that medium term, and so we don't have that much exposure to floods, fires into the future, as an example.
And I think, also just in line with that, we have actually a question from Luis asking what's the difference between the objectives and targets in the strategy pillar and the ones in the metrics and targets?
So metrics and targets would be most often related to your emissions, right? You want to set a target for XYZ reduction. In the strategy piece, you describe how you're actually gonna achieve those targets. So you might say, I'm going to reduce emissions by 20%, or might have zero scope 2 emissions. And then in your strategy, it might say that involves moving the Brisbane office to a 5-star Green Star office, then and procuring XYZ, and in our warehouse in Orange, installing X megawatts of solar panels. That's where you are going to describe on how you achieve that emissions target. Everything else about resilience, how you're going to build that, decision making, how you're going to build that, is describing the how. See here in the other sections you've defined them. In the strategy section you define how you've done them. Great question. So to give you examples, this is what time horizons look like. Short term, the next 2 years, if you were to report today. That medium term, what happens by 2030, and then in long term, what happens when we achieve as a society those net zero goals and your full adaptation to the risks that occur at that point. So building this idea that whatever you do has a matrix of 3 short term, medium term, and long term really help you have conversations with your stakeholders. How do you support these decisions? Again, the word here is in a reasonable way, which means it needs to be reasonable in terms of materiality. It is actually significant to your business, and the source of this information or this modeling or this selection is compliant or is credible in a sense. This includes data that, luckily for us, has now been published by the government. There are many data sources where you can map exposure of your business, and NetNada has access to that, and we can teach you how to navigate those data sources. You need to look at your current conditions, what's happening today and how you need to act, and of course, that future forecasts. There is uncertainty in future projections, but we want to incorporate that uncertainty and prepare accordingly. The other thing as well, which is maybe to the question that was asked before, and why some companies don't disclose certain information, there is fine lines in terms of you are to gather this information without undue cost or effort, and that undue cost or effort is not described. It is up to your auditor, it is up to your audience of the report to determine if you actually did the effort or not. So if you are a big bank and you tell me you didn't have enough money or time to actually look of the exposure of all the home loans you do, people want to say, well, you should, because you're a big bank. If you are a small business and you can't access or you don't have the in-house expertise to conduct your own climate scenario to perfection, it is understandable. Okay, so you can find here the paragraph 11 that kind of describes the undue cost or efforts. Does that clarify why some reports have more things than others? Is mostly because of this line of undue cost or effort that describes your ambition level or capacity level to get things done.
So I guess in that case, it's key to highlight once again the importance of keeping tracks and records of everything. How you got to that decision, even if it's we don't have the money to do it. Okay, how can you explain that? And anything that you're showing or not showing needs to be explained.
Exactly. And explain to your auditor, explain within your team, within your processes. You might not have to disclose that you didn't do it because there wasn't enough time or money, but you want as much as you can in a more transparent way, which was one of the pillars, to describe why certain things did not happen. Really good point, Maka. Thank you very much. Any questions? Thanks, Luis. Thanks, Anne, for that, and also Maka. Thanks for keeping me on track with the questions. Please put them in the chat as we carry on. Take some time to reflect on what we've learned so far. Learn about the two new documents published by the government. Learn about the core components of a transition plan, and you've now covered the first one, which is climate risk and opportunities. We want to try to speed to the other ones so we are on time. Business model and value chain. Okay, this is to understand both the current impacts and anticipated impacts in terms of your operations, resources, partnerships, sales, etc. This is about the considerations of how do these risks and opportunities potentially affect your business model, how you make money, and the value chain, the people who help you make money or receive value from what you do. We need to consider the scope in terms of those time frames, short term, long term, operational shifts. What do you need to do in terms of cost structure, move budget from marketing to climate resilience, spend time doing more sales in a different area compared to the other. Growth and development, what things you actually might capture with this changing climate. A good example is greener products, low carbon services, different sectors. Go and sell your services to these industries that have been targeted for decarbonization, as an example. And think about your internal, what's happening within your business, but also external, your suppliers, partner, and primarily as well customers, how they react to your current offerings. Then where in the business model are they most concentrated? Because you need to pick based on how much resources you have, where you're going to focus and where you're going to do these assessments and where you're going to dedicate your energy. And not everything is made equal in terms of climate impact. So you need to look at your geographical locations, facilities, and assets that are going to be impacted. You might operate in Sydney, Brisbane, and Perth, and maybe your facility in Perth is really well suited and it's fine. It's an industrial area. There's no risk. But then you look at your New South Wales facility and you are very exposed. And so you're going to focus your energy on that. Identify the hotspots, assess the risks at an asset level, be specific, understand on the opportunity side or risk coming from regulation in some of the products that you offer in your industry, how it applies to you, and then look at your supply chain. Look at your upstream, where things come from, and downstream as well, if there's going to be any dependencies on suppliers going out of business because they can't adapt, not having a green product, super exposed where the factory is, more tough contracts to negotiate, and so forth. This is an example. I don't expect you to read all of these, but I'll send the slides. This is how, when you're shaping up a matrix, a full-time example of the mitigations and adaptations based on the risk and opportunities. So a good example is, let's say we've increased the severity and frequency of extreme weather events. Okay, so more storms. This might be that floods, bushfires, and heat waves are affecting a portfolio company. That's what we call it, Ozprop, and they have a big portfolio with several things, and they are now seeing increased insurance costs and a devaluation of their assets because of where they are located. So located in a flood-prone area, no one wants to buy it. Valuation goes down. The mitigation adaptation based on the risk identified is for them to conduct a very accurate physical risk assessment to really quantify that risk, because that might go into proposals, back to the insurance, and so forth. And then doing site selections or redesigning their own sites to mitigate that exposure. Maybe it's waterways, coverage, trees, grazing, whatever it might be, and incorporate those new measurements. Could be in that exposure, or also when doing like refurbishment to become more energy efficient, better materials, etc. So this is like an example of I identified something and I wrote in my strategy what that mitigation or adaptation looks like. As you can see here, I didn't go into the money side of it, but it's just an example of what it looks like. Looking at how you can make these decisions, okay? The plan is to have a place to respond to these external factors and internal processes that are happening in your business, and we want to see evidence of these things taking place and who and how they're influencing how your company moves forward, right? The
I'm
key.
gonna take the time, Afonso, to launch another poll related to what you're saying. I think we
No
touched
worries.
base on this. It's basically understanding when do you think it's the right time to start working or to start drafting your strategy and talking about this decision making. There we go. Interesting replies. I think Afonso basically touched on this in the beginning, but we'll look into a roadmap in a couple of slides to understand better when strategy needs to be drafted. And we've been talking with other companies, and especially the University of Sydney, that have published the report, when they started, which were their main challenges, how many people were involved, and so on.
Thank you for the answers. We have a 50% split on being the first thing as an initial framework, and then goes down after that. So half of you answered as a first thing. All right. So now, just being conscious about that, there is no right way to do it. There is better ways depending on your business. We're trying to apply, our lenses from what we've learned, what we're actually doing today, and how other businesses are reacting. Thank you, Maka. Make sure that we launch all the polls. Thanks for keeping me on track. So, how has your organization responded? So, if you've identified it, you're doing your climate disclosures, you identified what's potentially wrong, you've done the assessments, you've mapped your value chain, and now how do you respond? And you can see the term here is in the past, which means there's an assumption of already operationalizing or setting up examples on how you can make decisions based on this, and how you plan to respond moving forward. Things to consider is adjustment for your business model, mitigation and adaptation, like I was saying in the example I just gave before. Indirect, when I mean indirect, is something that you can control in terms of like building assets, but maybe how your value chain gets impacted. Outline how this will happen, and back to Louis' questions, in your climate transition plan and how you write it in your strategy, and how does that impact in achieving your targets. A good example is that if you have to go and have a physical asset and move it somewhere else, you might have to spend a lot of like greenhouse gas emissions moving those things or building something new to begin with. So in that period, your emissions go up, but in the future they come down. So understanding how certain actions, maybe increasing your logistic route because you're moving suppliers, how that down the road might impact your overall emissions inventory. It's things you can consider and should consider in this process. Now, finally, the resourcing, what plans are, and these plans might be in terms of talent, might be in terms of like money available, training, research and development. It's not just about financially, in a sense, just giving the future projection that your business is prepared to change how they're organized to be able to adapt to these things. Okay. Finally, long-term commitment. It might start with setting up, like we said, that sustainability committee who has the responsibility of adapting to these things, but also might be allocating to budget to an external consultant, to buying tools, to doing training, and to invest in different assessments, as an example. Here's the link to the paragraph if you want to see a bit more on how they request you to explain this. So make sure you keep track of this little note in each slide. This is an example of capital allocation, which is a hard part. Is X amount of money to invest in renewables. Here we made the example of billions, but this could be 150,000 for a solar panel. Your resilience fund that we've called here, like as a large corporation, might be just investing in retrofitting a certain part of your physical building, or changing a type of product to be more efficient. And new technology might be where you actually deploy money into R&D. A good example is that when it comes back to be specific to your company, specific to your industry, the naming, what matters and what's material, it's really, really different. There is not one way to do it. So I just want to be careful that when you're seeing how other businesses are applying or doing capital allocation, don't just look at the same numbers and values. Really consider your own group, your own situation, your own portfolio, and your own clients to select how much is enough. You can change this into the future, but just be aware that like that allocation should be there. Finally, the last piece of the strategy and decision making is tracking progress. So really simple, you track progress for everything else. How you track progress for your climate related plans, updates, how often you update the board, KPIs and metrics, who's on top, and how you, if you set your net zero target by 2050, what is your halfway point, and so forth. And show us that you have strategies to revisit maybe every 2 years how you've created this plan. It doesn't have to be every 6 months, doesn't have to be every month. Just have a cadence of sorts. Any questions on that part of strategy? Maka, did I miss anything?
No, you're doing great, and you're on time. We have 15 minutes, and I'm gonna take there's 2 more polls, I swear, and then that's it on my side. I'm gonna launch the next one. Just give me 2 seconds. The reason why we're asking this question about how many people were involved, especially in the UCID report, but also thinking about your own companies or those companies that you're supporting, it's because sometimes it looks like it's too much and there's not so many people involved or not so many people to tackle all these, or the other way around. So we want to understand how many people you think should be involved in this kind of things.
This is a great question, Maka. I didn't know this one was going to come through. That's awesome. While the poll is going, and ask a question: how often are scenarios expected to be refreshed? This comes to, in your decision making process in the strategy, you might define what triggers refreshing those scenarios. So a trigger might be, like I said, once you're going to deploy a certain amount of capital, you might have to look at those and maybe refresh the modeling will not change. Can get more granular to where you operate, but like the overall modeling is like a bit set in stone and gets adapted, of course, every X amount of years when the IPCC releases new models. But you should think about it from a business perspective. If I am moving into a new market and now I'm operating in a different part of Australia or different country and region, you should look if your risk enterprise framework needs to be adapted, or if sales are struggling in a different sector or they're actually doing really well, can you allocate more money to be more resilient so you're not as exposed or you're not carrying that much risk within your business? That decision is made from the business on that governance and decision making part of your strategy. It is not forced by legislation for you to revisit them, as an example. It is there is a nuance of when different things are going to become auditable, right? So the moment they hit that milestone that they need third-party assurance, then make sure that you are revisiting your processes on how you're getting things done to make sure you pass that assurance. It's not just about doing it; it's about doing it right with the right processes. So you might want to look at that deadline to revisit how you're getting things in place. To summarize, it is triggered by your decision-making strategy and your governance, not by an external deadline that is forcing you to revisit every amount of years. All right. So the right answer, Maka, do you want to tell the right answer to the audience?
How big? Yes. Yeah. So from the interviews we had with the people involved in the UCID report, their team is based on 5 people actually working on different sections. But in terms of the strategy development, they were working with different stakeholders. We all know USAID, it's a big organization. And there were more than 15 people involved in that strategy planning on different areas of the organization, on procurement, facilities, operations, the governance piece, and everything. But the core team was 5 people actually.
So to summarize, that is that the people carrying on the shoulders the process of disclosure was 4 to 5 depending on different timings, and then when they're doing the strategy and risk analysis, they've involved up to 15, 16, 17 stakeholders on different workshops, different meetings. So if you think about your business, it might not be as big as University of Sydney, but the reason there was all those stakeholders involved is because the different areas of that organization. So think about, you might involve like a country manager. You might, let's say if you operate in New South Wales and Victoria, you might bring the 2 parties, then finance. So it doesn't have to be that much, but ensure that you have coverage where everyone can add their 2 cents on how it can impact strategy moving forward. What is interesting is that element of like the core team for an organization that large. It wasn't that big. Of course, they had the help of external consultants in different areas, but consider your own resources and limitation in how you can like expand and reduce the team doing the work by leveraging systems, by leveraging consultants on getting the job done. All right, we are on the home stretch. Financial positions, which everyone was kind of asking about and a bit on the fence. This is the part of identifying the qualitative and quantitative information on how these factors impact finances over the short term, medium term, and long term. Again, your different time slots of projections. Here's the nuance. If quantitative data is not available, or it's too costly to get it done, you can provide these qualitative insights, which is more the storytelling. Remember, disclosing is easy. Your ambition level and what you want to get at is what's challenging. So if your investors are expecting you to be, mature in this area, then they might expect different things of you, and you can determine if it's relevant or not. This is all about how are these things that we've all done in the past going to impact your financial position. This is about your liabilities and your assets. You need to understand the physical impacts, if it's possible, damages, depreciation, like we gave in the example. And those, there was a question before, those transition costs. This is not about the cost of like inaction. This is about the cost of action. Is if you want to go and get more exposure or transition into a low carbon economy or divest from certain areas of your business, how much that's going to cost you. And like you said, it doesn't, if you can do it financially, that's okay, but you should tell the story of it's going to have a high impact on our business, or our executives will have to make budget planning, necessary decisions to have enough capital to do XYZ. You don't have to put a number on it if you can't model it yet, but you need to show evidence that you are thinking about those things and the costs of those. Also, the costs could be comparisons from different companies, different assets that already had gone through retrofits, as an example, or they had to be rebuilt. So draw inspiration from different things that already happened, because today we already have evidence of how climate impacts physical assets and businesses.
And Alfonso, just a question there. What do you tell clients when they come to you and tell you, actually, when taking these decisions or doing these projections, we are not 100% sure of the assumptions or the numbers we're getting to?
Yeah, the thing that I say is like transparency is the first objective of the disclosure. If you're not comfortable with disclosing your modeling, you don't have to. But I just iterate that done is better than perfect in terms of like showcasing how your business is thinking about these things, and then sharing that information can actually help you get external information, collaboration, and so forth. Also, don't overexpose your compliance risk whenever you don't have to, but just be conscious that it is about doing the exercise, and then later you can decide if you're going to publish it or not. No one is 100% certain of this modeling. They don't have enough time or money to do it, or the expertise. But think about how far you can get to make good business decisions. Same thing as when you expand into new markets, just from sales. You do it on assumptions, on some modeling, sales forecasts. The same thing applies to climate, and we expect a similar level of robustness. It doesn't have to be perfect, and financial models also change, so do climate models. How do we expect to affect the financial position? Like I said, now looking at the revenue as well of new products or existing products, cost increase coming from supply chain, insurance claims, different logistics, and if it's going to be profitable in the long term. Again, you might deem that this is immaterial for now, and you disclose as a business that you can't forecast in the short term that climate is going to impact the profitability of your business. And you can say that, and that is totally okay as well. Lastly, this capital expenditure, which is a big one, especially if you have physical assets, cash flow adjustments, if you have to have some cash in the bank to be able to recover from disruptions, being that in your supply chain or damages from floods, etc. And in this case, what's happening now? Do you have enough money and expertise to adapt to regulatory changes? Money is being spent on common reporting. Money is being spent on softwares like NetNada. Can you forecast what else is going to be needed into the future? And finally, new revenues and savings coming from participating in the low carbon initiative. The quantitative and qualitative information, like we were saying, it's all about stating that when it is not available and you can't do it, then you can use the qualitative approach. And it's okay. It is said in the legislation. It's something that we kind of keep on iterating on. If you don't have the resources to do financial modeling, you don't have to do it. But just understand that it's about your ambitions level as a company. You can combine both and disclose both at the same time. It's not one versus the other, but just be aware there is some nuances and some gray areas in that. It is hard to identify them separately, but whenever you can, try to separate or combine whenever you see it's necessary. Again, up to the company, up to the cost and the talent and the expertise within your business to do this work. Any questions on the financial quantification? Maka, did I miss anything? No? Perfect. All right. Finally, very shortly, climate resilience. It's about withstanding the changes that will occur, and we have to be ready for those. The key considerations is how is your entity, how is your business assessing for resilience, which is showcasing how you can have adaptability to what's already occurring. Doesn't matter what you do in your business, climate change will impact how you do business. We want to show evidence of that. The models have been published. They're not going away. As an investors, as external readers, we just want to understand if you're going to be resilient to that. That's the main key. Resilience is the word that you need to focus on. Doing climate scenarios, picking the right scenarios, using international standards, the time horizons, it's all to build the picture that your business will be resilient into the future. And that's what you need to show. Show it on your areas of strength. Show on things that are material to your business. Don't spend time or effort in things that are irrelevant and will not provide additional information for me to believe that your business is ready for what's coming. Try to minimize money on things that are not relevant to you and just focus on your core concepts that are going to come for picking the right scenarios and identifying the right risks. A scenario looks like this. Scenario is an example from a published report from Ventia, which is construction property. It is about showcasing the best case scenario that happens today in Australia where they operate, all the way to the worst case scenario, where in one section there is more climate change, temperature increase, fossil fuel combustion continues to grow, physical impacts are more severe, and showcase that future, and then look at the best case scenario where like the climate targets of Australia end up working out and we have a rapid decline in fossil fuel usage. There's less storms, less temperature increase, and how does that impact in your business? You need to showcase both, and we'll go through that in the next session. Any questions on that? Do you want to launch your last poll, Maka?
Yes, I'm going to do that, conscious of time. 1 minute to 1 p.m. And after all we've been through today, it's just to understand how confident you feel drafting your strategy, if you feel you need external support, if you need to have the right team inside the business, and so on.
The best thing that you could do is map out actually that document, right, and the different sections that we kind of covered, and with you by yourself as an individual, try to create that as just a storytelling. And then once you've done that just on your own understanding of the business, share it with a colleague and bounce those ideas. And then after that, maybe go and seek that support to find the right sources, pick the climate scenarios, and etc. It can be a work in progress. You don't have to do it, straight from the get-go. If this is your first time looking at a climate transition plan, it's a lot of information to digest. It's one of the big kind of sections of climate disclosures. I don't expect anyone to be able to do it by themselves straight away, but just starting to familiarize yourself with what's needed, finding these sections in public reports, it's really, really valuable. Lastly, before we close out, conscious of time, there is a roadmap that we have available. So do ask for it via email, which kind of plans how you can link these things together. And we added that strategy at the end after you've done all the other sequences. You can do your first draft at the beginning to get the story going, then build all the other pillars, and then come back to your strategy and really nail that. This is really valuable to communicate with stakeholders, so please request it via email if you're interested in the roadmap and the risk matrix. That is all for today. It's a long, dense session. I tried to make it as approachable as possible. I will share the slides and the recording. And if you can, bookmark the legislation whenever possible and read through that and enjoy the rest of your day. I'm here to help. Maka is as well. You have my phone number. Send me some emails, and let's chat about how we can educate ourselves better in this hard topic.
And if you have any questions or any feedback, please let us know as we prepare for the next webinar.